every day. It's a getting closer, going faster than a roller coaster.
Hi guys, welcome back to another instalment of my constant reader journey through the complete works of Stephen King. Today we're looking at what is maybe the most iconic coming-of-age story of all time, really.
Why don't you go home and fuck your mother some more?
And that is The Body, or Stand By Me, as it's more famously known because of the 1986 film adaptation. As always, I'm going to unpack the book, the film, my own personal thoughts on both. You'll not be surprised to learn that my thoughts around this are overwhelmingly positive because it is an awesome story. If you enjoy this video, remember to subscribe. This channel is going to feature a lot more Stephen King content, so you'll be the first to know when I'm talking about the next horror classic. Now, The Body is the third novella in the book Different Seasons. We've already covered The Shawshank Redemption and Apt Pupil on this channel. Please check those videos out as well. Summer is up in Apt Pupil. We now must move on to The Fall from Innocence, because Americans seem to call it fall instead of autumn. I'm actually going to be referring to the story as Stand By Me instead of The Body. Columbia Studios changed the name because they hated it, and I kind of do as well. The Body sounds like a snuff film, or maybe a documentary about Elle Macpherson. I think The Body puts as well too much emphasis on Ray Brower, which he's important, but he's also like a means to an end. Stand By Me tells you that this is a story about friendship, which is really its core.
Give me some skin. I'll see you. Not if I see you first.
I'd never read the book or watched the film, but I'd heard about it because it's so praised. The bar was set quite high and it truly exceeded every expectation I had. Like, Stephen King walks a tightrope expertly between light-hearted childhood nostalgia and like brutal realities of life. He somehow manages to make you laugh and cry in just a few pages. And what I found so funny is how this story is very much a time machine. We're shown a cross-section of boys growing up in a bygone era, where if kids were bored, they just went outside into the wilderness and played, which doesn't really happen anymore because of the internet. Like, my generation, I always grew up having the internet and technology, so I spent most of my youth indoors. This story really taps into a simpler and more magical time. These days, if a kid wanted to see a dead body, all of that and much worse is on the web. Kids kind of grow up overnight now. They don't get these formative experiences anymore because they're so overexposed to adult material on social media anyways. But yeah, enough of my boomer talk. I think this story is compelling because King is not aggrandizing the year 1960. He's not saying my generation had it the best. Like, each of the main characters, the four boys, they come from a challenging environment at home. And the fact that Ray Brower is hit by a train, these are very dangerous times. And I appreciate King for being able to look back at his youth without putting on rose-tinted glasses. It's a very fair look at the environment he was raised in. And I suppose if we can compare Stand By Me to other classic coming-of-age stories, like The Breakfast Club, it's not as representative. Like, there's no female perspective here. I could see this read, alienating girls who are reading it. Boys do overlap in places. But it's a very moving vignette about the struggles of the latchdoor generation. How, the post-World War II generation had to adjust to a world that changed at such an alarming rate. The human experience is a strange one. Strange enough that this story doesn't need any bells or whistles to be scary, to be touching, joyful, all at the same time. When I reviewed Apt Pupil, I compared King to Dostoevsky and Sinclair Lewis, but Stand By Me has a very different vibe. His take on the loss of innocence in youth, it's very reminiscent, to me at least, of J.D. Salinger. In fact, in a lot of ways, Gordon LeChance was really reminding me of Holden Caulfield from Catcher in the Rye. And I mean that as a compliment, because people say so many terrible things about that book, but that character is so polarising and so realistic. There's also a lot of instances where you can tell King is vocalising his own philosophies around life in a way that felt very Tolstoy to me. Like, he might not know the meaning of existence, but he doesn't care all that much. He just wants to live in the moment and enjoy life. And I think that's what makes this story quite uplifting, because the overall tone is very happy and optimistic. It has the same emotional density as Shawshank, but maybe resonates with more people since we were all young at some point. I also think that the main boy, Gordon LeChance, he's one of the more successful attempts at a writer character. Like, King loves to make a protagonist a writer, and I think next to Paul Sheldon, this is one of his best versions of that trope. Gordy is like a very nuanced character. He seems to represent the birth of creativity from trauma, which is what motivated King to start writing in the first place, the power that storytelling imparts onto the audience. The book features two of the first stories that Gordy ever wrote, and they're both very interesting, but more on that later. So the book starts, and it's a weekend in the summer of 1960. Gordon LeChance, Teddy Duchamp, Chris Chambers, they're playing cards together in a treehouse. Then Tessio joins in and relates how he overheard his older brother talking about how they found a dead body of a boy, Ray Brower, who was hit by a train but couldn't report it due to driving a stolen car.
So? It ain't nothing to us. The kid's dead, so it ain't nothing to him neither. And who gives a shit if they ever find him? I don't. But it's that kid they were talking about.
The boys plan to spend the next 48 hours hiking into the wilderness on a quest to find Ray Brower's body.
In the Harlow? That's really far. Sure. He must have started walking on the train tracks and just followed them the whole way.
Partly to report it to the police, but I think more so since they're 12 years old and they've never seen a dead body before. There is a morbid curiosity that I think is very central to the plot.
I bet you anything that if we find him, we'll get our pictures in the paper. Yeah, we could even be on TV. Sure, we'll be heroes.
Gordy, he's recently lost his older brother after he was hit by a car. And so there's a lot of his narrative being about coping with survivor's guilt, particularly since his brother was so celebrated around town. He's always lived in his shadow, so much so that his parents don't even seem to acknowledge his existence.
Pop, did you read the story that Gordy wrote? Gordy wrote a story. It was really good.
What did you write, sweetheart?
And this, this somewhat spoke to me. I mean, I have an older brother who's 9 years my senior, and there are definitely moments where I can feel myself, like, playing second fiddle. Like, he was the first person in our family to go to university. Even though I got into med school, it does sometimes feel like you're just walking in someone else's footsteps. Like, I can't imagine the pain that Gordy must have felt to be so neglected. Like, sure, the other three boys are smacked around by their fathers, but at least, like, their parents care enough to hurt them physically. Like, as strange as that sounds, indifference, I do think indifference is worse than hate. The way that his parents just don't even know he's there. But herein lies the magic of this story. Like, Gordy takes that hardship and channels it into his first ever story, Stud City. And it's so evocative, so semi-autobiographical, that you are endeared to him as a character in a way that's so clever and so meta. And I think that's such a brilliant strategy for creating a character.
Fuck writing. I don't want to be a writer. It's stupid.
But back to the other boys. On their way to the body, they pass through the town dump. They come head to head with Milo Pressman. This was another moment that was very funny and very relatable. So Milo has a dog called Chopper, who's become a bit of an urban legend. None of the boys have even seen this dog before, but it's notoriously this huge, vicious beast that savages kids if Milo tells it to. In reality, Milo's dog is a scrawny mongrel.
That's Chopper!
Chopper was my first lesson in the vast difference between myth and reality.
Come on, Chuppy! Kiss my ass, Chuppy!
They don't realise this until they've scaled the junkyard fence, and Milo accuses them of trespassing, which is obviously nonsense because it's public property, and he's there too, but he's like this weirdo deadbeat, so it's not surprising. He recognises all four of the boys, and then he makes fun of Teddy's father for being mentally ill. He calls him a loony, which seems to be a real trigger word for Teddy. It was interesting to see the different relationships that the boys had with their fathers. Like, even though Teddy was physically abused by his father, like his dad deformed his ears by pressing the sides of his face onto a stove, he still worships his father as like a hero who stormed Omaha Beach in the 40s.
Your dad's a loony up in the nut house in Togus. He took your ear and he put it to a stove and he burnt it off.
My father stormed the beach in Normandy.
And I think King is drawing from his own experiences of growing up in a broken home, like trying to piece together something resembling a wholesome traditional family unit, despite what life had given him. Like, Teddy's dad is in an asylum, so he's absent. Teddy's able to recreate him into this perfect father figure, and he can't handle when people like Milo remind him that that's not true. But we then arrive at the single most iconic scene of this story, the thing that's always on the cover of this book. When you think of Stand By Me, you of course go straight to the train scene. So they left the junkyard, they continue on their journey, and now they've arrived at a trestle bridge. Now this bridge is exclusively tracks, there's no footpath. A train could come at any moment, they don't know the schedule. It's a long fall down. Take all that into consideration, and it's pretty dangerous. There's even a second route that goes around the trestle bridge, but because it's longer and they're impatient, impetuous youths, they of course take the dangerous trestle bridge. And this moment, it's such a masterclass in building suspense, because trains are unpredictable at the best of times. Like, you're waiting for this train to come, and it's as if they're waiting too, because they walk so slowly over this bridge. Gordy puts his hand on the metal railing, and there's that unmistakable knowing that fills him with dread.
Train! Oh, shit! Move it, man! Go on, move it!
Especially as they're crossing the bridge, single file, and he's last. When the train inevitably does come, you just get, like, the literary equivalent of whiplash. Like, we went from slow-paced concentration to Gordy screaming, "Train!" And the boys are running. They're, like, running at breakneck speed. Like, Chris and Teddy make it to the other side, but then Gordy has to practically whip Vern to get him to close the distance. It felt like a premonition of Gordy's conversation later with Chris, how if he keeps the company of Vern and Teddy, they'll drag him down into being just another lowlife, because they don't have the same abilities that he has. The boys call it a night, and they set up a campfire. They eat the food that Gordy bought earlier by pooling their pocket money together. We get Gordy's second story, The Revenge of Lard-Ass Hogan. It's about an overweight boy called Davy Hogan. He enters a pie eating contest, but he does it purely to settle a score against the town for bullying him. So before the contest, he drinks a load of cod liver oil so that when he eats enough pies, he just vomits everywhere.
Diving into his fifth pie, Lardass began to imagine that he wasn't eating pies, He pretended he was eating cow flops and rat guts and blueberry sauce.
And chaos ensues, the townspeople break out in vomiting fits at the sight of it, and the competition's ruined. It's a barfarama.
A complete and total barfarama.
What I like about this story is that it has a lot of parallels to Carrie, Stephen King's first ever published novel, in that it's a revenge plot where an adolescent misfit gets their comeuppance against their bullies in a very exaggerated manner. It's almost like the polar opposite as well to Carrie, because Carrie's all about angst, social conformity, sexuality. This story is like a small town environment. They both, I think, also highlight the toxicity of competition in traditional gender roles. Like, Carrie dreams of being the prom queen because to her that represents like peak female accomplishment, while Davy enters the pie eating competition because the winners are celebrated men around town. I think it was really neat how the two stories are thematically like siblings. It's clear that Gordy telling this story to his friends, who hang on his every word, it's like an allegory for King telling his first story, Carrie, to the world. Like, it's a very sweet parallel between art and reality. I think it's hilarious as well how easily the boys get scared. There's a thunderstorm that night and the boys keep hearing these seemingly supernatural noises. The next day too, when they swim around in a pond, they come out mortified. They're covered in leeches.
No, Vern, there is something on your neck.
It's a leech.
Leeches! Oh my God! Jesus Christ!
I mean, secretly, most leeches are harmless. And in fact, some leeches can even do your body good by thinning your blood. Ironically, leeches are still used today in like microsurgery and reconstructive surgery. So Teddy Deschamps, with his deformed ears, could have had them help him, but no, they're 12-year-old boys. All they saw was shiny black parasites, and it was over. Gordy realises he has one of them sucking on his testicle, and he faints. It's so funny. Our long quest for Ray Brower's body, it culminates in the boys finding him.
There he is! I see him! Look! Look, over there! I see him! I see him!
None of us could breathe.
And it's very impactful. You know, this is the first time they've seen a dead body. When you're 12, you think you'll be young forever. So seeing a boy who's their own age, now dead, knowing that he's never coming back, if it can happen to him, then it can happen to them. And in fact, it will happen to them. We're all going to be pushing up daisies one day. I don't think seeing that body is the real fall from innocence for these boys. Like, yes, King has shown us the humbling of bold youth, but I think the fall from innocence is more about the realisation that life is unfair. Like, you make these friends that you have to enjoy in the moment, because eventually, if you delude yourself into thinking you'll always have them, you'll be more upset when they leave you, and suddenly you have a load of new friends. Like, bad boy around town, Ace Merrill and his gang, they show up. There's a standoff.
Two choices. You either leave quietly, we take the body, or you stay, we beat the shit out of you. We take the body.
Over who gets to report the dead body. But ultimately, neither groups get to do it. The boys fend off the thugs with a gun, but Ace promises revenge. The body's anonymously tipped off to the police. The boys go home after their unforgettable weekend adventure. And then essentially, life takes over. Teddy and Vern go their separate ways from Chris and Gordy, mainly due to the latter two entering higher education. Vern dies in a house fire. Teddy dies in a car accident. Chris is actually stabbed in the throat at a fast food restaurant, which Gordy then sees in the newspaper. Gordy is a 34-year-old professional writer with a wife and kids, the sole survivor of their 12-year-old gang. In this story, there's no blood-sucking vampire, there's no interdimensional clown spider. The beast here is time. All Gordy has left to hold on to are the memories of his youth. A story that can be told and retold to millions through the wonder of writing. And Ace is a mediocre bum now, which gives Gordy a lot of satisfaction, which was very relatable. I am looking forward to like that position one day, like bumping into someone on the street who used to go to school with and like seeing how different they now are, especially if there's someone who peaked in high school. So I did find that a funny way to end the story. While watching the film, I made some notes. This was the first time I'd ever seen it, and there was some interesting trivia as well. I'm not usually a fan of over-narration, but with this type of story, it's kind of unavoidable, because if you didn't have narration, you'd lose so many of the amazing quotes from the book, and from, I think Richard Dreyfuss does like a terrific job.
Just ahead of him, two men got into an argument. One of them pulled a knife. Chris, who had always made the best peace, tried to break it up. He was stabbed in the throat. He died almost instantly.
Bizarrely, the film is set in Oregon and not Maine. Apparently, the screenwriters misunderstood the source material because the body states that Castle Rock is near Portland, and the screenwriters thought that he meant Portland, Oregon, and not Portland, Maine. It doesn't really matter, but I do think it was a funny mistake. Gordy's relationship with his brother is much more fleshed out in the film. We get flashback scenes that show them together, and it's so much more upsetting because of it, because he's like a good brother who seems to overcompensate because of their parents' neglect. I loved all the 50s stylings, the fashion cues, the pompadours, the copious use of hair gel. All the boys had so much hair gel. The white ankle socks, the soundtrack as well was awesome. Although I was surprised that there was no Elvis. Although apparently they originally had Michael Jackson. The plan was to have him record his own version of Benny King's Stand By Me. I like as well how it was very greasified. It was like the 80s doing the 50s. Like, it was very nice. There was no sexual assault, no racist slurs. It was just rockabilly charm. One thing that did confound me, though, besides what animal is Goofy, because that is a great question, I will admit.
Mickey's a mouse, Donald's a duck, Pluto's a dog. What's Goofy?
But no, when they hear the howling and the ghost noises at night, Chris pulls out his dad's gun, but Vern and Teddy don't react, even though they had no knowledge that Chris even had that gun, and would absolutely be taken aback by it. It was a very strange scene. Like, it took some of the heft out of the gun being used later on. Although, interestingly enough, in the film version, it's actually Gordy who points the gun at Ace, and not Chris. I'm not sure I appreciate that change. It makes so much more sense for Chris's character to use the gun versus Gordy, because Chris has nothing to lose. He's full of self-loathing. He's just told Gordy the brown skirt incident where he stole some milk money, he put it back, but then the teacher framed him so she could pocket the money herself. Like, that's such a horrifying thing to happen to a child. And so Chris holding the gun makes more sense. It's like a return to order. He's become like a vigilante who's returning justice to the world by defending his right to browse corpse. Particularly as well when we know less than a decade later what happens to the actor River Phoenix and how he dies tragically. I just think it would have made more sense. Apparently Rob Reiner saw over 300 different boys audition for these roles. He went with the ones who he felt most authentically were the characters they played in real life. And I do think that's the best way to approach this task, because child acting is an ethical minefield. So by selecting actors who already remind you of the characters anyways, that eliminates any need to project onto these very impressionable children. Even in the production of some of these scenes, when Chris cries about the brown skirt situation, Rob Reiner made him cry in real life by asking him to think about a time an adult had genuinely disappointed him. And that's why he's sobbing uncontrollably, because all that emotion was real.
Just wish that I could go someplace where nobody knows me.
And when the boys find Ray Brower's corpse, this was actually the first time those child actors had seen the body. Lines were improvised. Their unsettled reaction to it was 100% real, and I love that. That's exactly how you solve this dilemma of working with children. I do love also how they actually went to the effort of recreating the Davy Hogan story. Like, the vomit effects, they've aged badly, but they look fake in a way that's endearing. Like, you can't be mad at them for trying. They made a fake vomit mix out of large curd cottage cheese and blueberry pie filling, and then they pumped 5 gallons of that into a vacuum and hosed it out of the side of their mouths, so it looked like from the side that they were like projectile vomiting, which that's fun. Like, I'm happy they did that.
Poor Bill Travis knew it. He was covered with 5 pies worth of used blue.
They also used female stunt doubles at the end of the train scene to make sure that the boys were safe. They had adult women dress in their clothes and short haircuts to do the final jump off the bridge at the end. They also shot the train with a telephoto lens so that they could manipulate the distance between the train and the stunt workers, so they didn't have to get as close as it looked in the film. Stephen King is on record as saying that this is his favourite adaptation of one of his books. And yeah, you can see why. Like, when Rob Reiner first showed him the finished project, King hugged him because he had perfectly rendered something that was so personal to King's childhood. And to think that it's this film that led to the development of Castle Rock Entertainment, the production company that specialises in adapting King's work, among other projects. The town of Brownsville as well in Oregon, which was used as the main filming location, they celebrate that every year on July 23rd, being the annual Stand By Me Day, which of course involves a pie eating contest and other nods to the original story. Love that. Would love to go and visit Brownsville, Oregon one day. I think that would be an awesome time. I could really go on for hours about this story. Like, it is a treat, but I'm sure you wouldn't be surprised that it is a formative story in pop culture. Like, it's King's love letter to not just his own youth, but to life lived in general. And much like the rest of Different Seasons, it really shows you how storytelling is at the core of the human experience, and that's something that we should really value. So, thank you for watching, and as always, Toodaloo.